Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our February instance of the New York State Archives Magazine online speaker series. Our topic today is the Black Woods, a scheme of justice and benevolence on the Adirondack frontier. I'm Tom Ruller. I'm the retired New York State archivist and a board member of the New York State Archives Partnership Trust and the moderator of most of these online speaker series. We are honored to welcome our speaker today, Amy Godine, who will share the remarkable history of Black pioneers who built futures for their families and fought for their civic rights on the Adirondack frontier. Her work sheds light on the resilience and determination of those early settlers, returning them to their rightful place at the center of this story. Amy is an author and independent scholar based in Saratoga Springs, New York. She spent over 3 decades researching, writing, and speaking about ethnic, migratory, and Black Adirondack history. Among her many contributions, she curated the exhibit Dreaming of Timbuktu at the John Brown Farm State Historic Site in North Elba, New York, a site absolutely worth visiting. In today's session, Amy and I will talk a little bit. Amy's going to talk a lot. And we're all going to listen, but there'll be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A box right at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to address as many questions as possible at the end of our program. So with that, welcome, Amy. I'm delighted to see you in person, or actually virtually, and look forward to talking about this fantastic book, which I think needs to be, it's required reading for any historian that's in the Adirondack Park, and really any historian who wants to understand better how to uncover the stories that haven't been told. So with that, Amy, it's all you.
Thank you so much, Tom. I love that endorsement. I'm going to use it constantly over and over again. I want to start this talk about my book and its story with an apology. Everybody loves a PowerPoint, but I don't have one. I don't have enough pictures. The history I'll share with you was not documented visually. None of us who've dug into this history has turned up a single picture of the Black farmers on their land when they were living and working their land. No cabins, no family portrait, no lone chimney in the woods, homes that lasted, barns that stayed. Family portraits cost money, and money was exactly what the Black New Yorkers who got free land from Gerrit Smith in 1846 and 7 did not have. A few photographs survive that reveal grantees in old age or at Civil War events, but I've found nothing that animates their lives as Adirondack pioneers. So your imaginations will need to meet me halfway today, and I invite you to take a cue from Frederick Douglass, who, when he learned about the land baron and reformer Gerrit Smith's decision to parcel out 120,000 Adirondack acres to 3,000 Black landless New York men from all over the state, let his imagination run wild. Let the sharp axe of the sable-armed pioneer be at once uplifted over the soil of Franklin and Essex counties, and the noise of falling trees proclaim the glorious dawn of civilization throughout their borders. Douglass bugled in his new launched Rochester newspaper, the North Star, in February 1848. Douglass, one of the 3,000 giftees to get an Adirondack lot, may have imagined moving to the woods himself. Gerrit Smith had sent him a deed to signal his delight when Douglass moved to New York. What inspired Douglass and scores of other prominent New York Black anti-slavery reformers to embrace Smith's Black Farm Colony Initiative of 1846 was more than the agrarian vision of Black families on self-owned, self-providing land, far from unhealthy cities, racist gangs, and jobs with no hope of advancement. They were moved, too, by what these gifts could mean for Black civic empowerment. Since 1821, Black New Yorkers had been denied the vote unless they could show ownership of $250 in real estate. This onerous restriction, which effectively disenfranchised New York's potential Black electorate for half a century would be strongly challenged at New York's 1846 Constitutional Convention, but it would not be removed. That year in November, white voters once again resoundingly endorsed the racist property requirement. Gerrit Smith's land giveaway was his own private preemptive strike against this hated legislation. In the long letter about his, quote, scheme of justice and benevolence, Smith sent to prominent Black abolitionists in New York City, he declared, quote, since the state has determined that Black men must become landholders, that they may be entitled to vote, they will become landholders. Vote they will, cost what it will. And the giveaway advantaged Smith as well. He had inherited a load of wild Adirondack land from his father and had purchased plenty more at auction, but he didn't need his close to 1 million wild acres. He had a hard time unloading it, and the taxes were adding up. The management of so much property diverted him from his philanthropies. Giving up his land, this land he didn't need or want, not only relieved him of a financial burden, it enacted a kind of environmental distributive justice dear to his land reformer friends. It offered indirectly a homeowning solution for urban Black New Yorkers who couldn't hope for affordable and decent housing in their cities. It could step up interracial collaborations, both among the land agents for this giveaway and the Black pioneers and their prospective neighbors in the woods. And not least, it would roll out a strategy of affirmative action before this idea had a name. I know, Smith wrote his Black friends in New York City, that many poor white New Yorkers are as badly off as Black people. But white men can vote. Poor Black men cannot. This disadvantage tips the balance. With these land gifts, I can redress a racialized injustice. I can even out the field. Were any of Smith's gift lots worth $250? Maybe $40 or a little more. But with labor and improvements, the lot could gain this value soon enough. Smith might have given gifts of cash that would enfranchise his grantees outright, but his youthful Calvinism and Romanticism held his charity in check. A bracing encounter with the, quote, rigors of the Adirondack wilderness would work out a far better character, unquote, than if his grantees, quote, chose their homes on fat lands under genial suns. The frontier, then, would be a proving ground of Black manhood, and the new-made, self-respecting Black farmer would compel the respect of his white neighbors. To help him identify recipients for deeds who met his terms of eligibility, no drinkers, men of good character, demonstrably poor, and living in New York, Smith enlisted 12 anti-slavery activists, Black and white, most of them were Black, who he asked to serve on regional committees for wide swaths of the state. How much the white land agents did for this great plan is unclear. His Black land agents were another story. From Long Island to Albany, Poughkeepsie to Ithaca, Syracuse to Buffalo, they spread the word to Black New Yorkers about the offer of free deeds from the rich abolitionist in Peterborough, New York. They talked it up at their temperance meetings, anti-slavery conventions, and church gatherings, wrote about it in their newspapers, urging the new grantees to organize into small moving groups and start saving up. They enlisted the assistance of abolitionists in small towns around the state to vet and recommend prospective pioneers. One white enthusiast, a sheep broker named John Brown, was so besotted with Gerrit Smith's idea, he resolved to move his family to the Adirondacks himself. An experienced farmer and sometimes surveyor, he knew the new-made farmers would need a friend. He could make himself of use. And in just a few years' time, Gerrit Smith's land agents successfully recruited takers from almost all the 3,000 deeds. And then what happened? Here's where the script divides. No question, the great majority of the gift lots were neither farmed nor settled by their deed holders. And most of this unclaimed land probably got picked up by land speculators at auction and or reverted to the state for unpaid taxes and was eventually absorbed into the Adirondack Forest Preserve and the 6 million acre Adirondack Park. Gerrit Smith, for his part, moved briskly on to other anti-slavery initiatives. He bankrolled leaders of the Underground Railroad around the state and boldly defied the 1850 fugitive slave law when he organized a convention of fugitives and activists in Cazenovia, New York. He funded eager parties of anti-slavery homesteaders bound for Kansas. And more quietly, he put his money into anti-slavery strikes and skirmishes that grappled more directly and sometimes violently with the enslavers. The Adirondack pioneer John Brown, who spearheaded these efforts and had given up on Adirondack farming, had Gerrit Smith's support. But not until 1857 would Smith speak candidly about what he felt had happened in the Adirondack woods. To the New York City publisher, Horace Greeley, he wrote in an article that would be widely published around the country, maybe he should have given the grantees better land for farming. And yet, some people, white people, were making a go of it up there, thanks, quote, to their very hard work and very frugal habits. Why, Smith asked, considering the character of the colored people, should we expect them to do much in the Adirondacks? And with this sentence, the history was racialized. The grantees were fated not to make it, doomed to fail by a racial incapacity unfit for the pioneering challenge. His expectations had been too high. I agree with Smith. They were too high, but not because his giftees were lazy and unresourceful. Smith's expectations were too high because he never did his homework. The land he gave away was useless to his giftees without the means to move to it and work it, and this they didn't have. Frederick Douglass, after his first blaze of excitement, flagged this problem early on and backed away, and so did Smith's land agent, Dr. James McCune Smith. The grantees are just too poor to make this work, the doctor wrote Gerrit Smith from New York City. To bring a subsistence farm into production in the mid-1800s took around $1,500, a figure well beyond the reach of Smith's grantees, and well beyond the worth of the land itself. Add to the unthinkable expense the grantees' worries about the lack of sympathetic allies on the ground from the start, and I think we might consider that the absence Smith read as failure, presumed evidence of his grantees' incapacity, was in fact just the opposite. The grantees knew what they could manage, how much they could afford. This migration risked utter destitution. Why chance it? They also knew, as Smith did not, where, after the enactment of the 1850 Fugitive Slave Law, they felt relatively safe. It was not in the unfamiliar, unimaginable, overwhelmingly white woods to the north. Between their own disabling poverty and reports in black newspapers about devious surveyors and double-dealing guides, and the latest threat, thanks to this new slave law, of pursuit, capture, and re-enslavement, no small risk for numberless slave-born black New Yorkers, or for black New Yorkers who had never been slaves but were still at risk, like Solomon Northup, who was a Smith grantee. They had good reasons to stay put in the towns and cities where they lived. But you wouldn't know it from the history. The racist narrative of black incapacity, ingratitude, and unresourcefulness gave no quarter. New York County and town histories and Smith's biographies, and John Brown's biographies as well, painted Smith's bold exercise in affirmative action, suffrage justice, land reform, and rural integration as a misbegotten folly, a well-intentioned bust. Asserted Gerrit Smith's biographer in 1878, on the best land they would have done nothing. They had none of the qualities that make the farmer. Had the land been the richest in the state, they would not have responded, for they could not, it was not in them. Almost a half century later, E.P. Tanner dusted off the verdict for the State Historical Association, blaming, quote, the failure of Smith's giveaway on, quote, the character of the colonists who naturally hadn't either the training nor the stuff in them for pioneering. Nor would 20th century Black memory challenge these essentialist assertions. In 1909, W.E.B. Du Bois suggested Brown alone was responsible for, quote, much, if not all, of the giveaway's success. 10 years later, the Black scholar Zeta Dyson declared the Black grantees, quote, had none of the qualities of farmers and moreover were disabled by infirmities and vice. Particularly influential was an airy write-off from the popular regional historian Alfred Donaldson in 1920, I think it was 1920, who in his two-volume history of the Adirondacks summarily declared, the attempt to combine an escaped slave with an Adirondack farm was about as promising of agricultural results as would be the placing of an Italian lizard on a Norwegian iceberg. So you can understand just why, in the year 2000, when the Adirondack activist Martha Swan of John Brown Lives, a social action group in the Adirondacks, when she invited me to curate an exhibition on this rumored Black farm colony, I was not beguiled. Nothing happened, I insisted. I've read up on this. Nobody came. Everyone agrees. Well, dig a little deeper, she urged me. See what you turn up. What turned up, of course, was way too much to squeeze into our exhibition, which I hope you'll visit at the farm. It's still looking sharp and bringing the news. So I thought I'd get a pamphlet out of it, but the pamphlet bloomed into this book, which is what happens, as you know, when your first love, great secondary sources, is overtaken by the irresistible allure of the archives, and everything you once had to drive to any county or state to read is now right there on your screen, from Ancestry to anti-slavery newspapers to the admissions books for the New York Colored Orphans Asylum to Adirondack Town enlistment records from the Civil War. Things exploded when everything got digitized, and everybody's book, I'm guessing, is 20 years too late. But anyway, when I plunged into the research for my book and put the exhibition behind me and did the deeper dive, the story obviously stretched and deepened too. The geography of the giveaway, which I and others had understood to hew to the enclaves closest to John Brown's farm, the best known one, Timbuktu, gives its name to our exhibit, was actually much more extensive, even if no recognition had ever favored the Black pioneers who lived beyond Brown's orbit in St. Armand, Bloomingdale, Franklin, Blacksville, Negro Hill, and Negro Brook. In archival sources, too, I discovered the leading role of Smith's voluntary land agents, some of whom traveled to the Blackwoods to see how the settlers were getting on. And I found evidence of a greater demographic footprint, much more evidence of a wider footprint than Gerrit Smith had guessed. He put um, the settler population at about 50 max, which the New York Times and some historians would later confidently claim to have winnowed down to one family within a year. My head count, which spanned the decades between 1850 and the end of the century, was more generous. When I counted children, women, fellow travelers who, while deedless, still were drawn to Smith's idea, along with several fugitives from out of state who found their way to this territory, and Black Southerners, both veterans and civilians of the Civil War, who came north to the Giftwoods afterwards, urged by friends in the service, white and Black, I got a figure closer to 200, a few of whose descendants were in the region as recently as 2022. Still not much, you're thinking, next to Mr. Smith's hope for 3,000. But why should Smith's dashed hopes speak for our response? In Smith's extensive correspondence at Syracuse University's special collections is a letter from a grantee settler from the hamlet of Bloomingdale in northwestern Essex County. From Maryland, John Thomas has a leading role in my book, the trajectory of his long life could pack a novel. In 1840, he was 30 years in bondage on a Maryland plantation before he made his break for freedom. His wife had been sold away, their children had died in infancy. In Troy, New York, his New York home for 7 years, he got a gift deed from Gerrit Smith, and at mid-century moved to the Adirondacks with his second family, determined to start fresh. By 1872, he could share with Gerrit Smith a description of a home, quote, which by labor and necessity has been enlarged into a handsome farm of 200 acres with all necessary stock and farming implements and well secured, quote, with earnings of $200 or $300 every year. He told Smith that, thanks to your generous donation, we enjoy our rural life in peace and quiet. And now, and now that the toils of life are nearly done, he wanted the benefactor he'd never met to know that he had, quote, breasted the storm of prejudice and opposition until I begin to be regarded as an American citizen, which he puts in quotes. Heartily thank you for the interest you have always taken in the welfare of my people, and hoping to hear from you at your earliest convenience, I remain yours with great respect, John Thomas. He did not share with Smith how close the storm of opposition had come to ravaging his new Adirondack world. His old enslaver, in some year Thomas never specified, was so determined to get him back, he reportedly dispatched an investigator to track him down and bring him back to Maryland. And these slave catchers got close, only a few towns from Thomas's own home. But on learning that this black farmer was aware of their approach and was armed, quote, armed and would never be taken alive, and what's more, that, quote, the local whites would stand by him with certainty that someone would be killed, they beat a swift retreat. This from Frederick Seaver's Franklin County History of 1918, which I wasn't sure I could believe, though Seaver claimed to have confirmed the story in 3 towns. The backwoods saga had all the markers of Underground Railroad folklore, high drama, white heroes to the rescue, and 11th hour resolution. Like many tales of this type, it seemed to mainly reveal a postbellum storyteller's hopeful bid to stake out a local angle for the struggle between North and South, and to claim a bold preemptive role for a rural neighborhood at such a great remove from the sublime conflict to come. What dispelled my doubts finally was what I learned about Thomas um, from primary sources, from the tax redemption records in the New York State Archives, in fact. And this revealed his high standing in the community and made me feel certain that they would have backed him as Seaver had described. In these documents, there are affidavits that show his white neighbor's support for him when he fell behind on his tax payments and was threatened with the confiscation of his farm. And they reveal Thomas and his wife Marianne doing exactly the same thing for their white neighbors and allies when they were threatened with legal action and the seizure of their property. And race was never mentioned in these documents, not once. Thomas was a poor farmer among others. All were in the same boat, all fighting the same swells. Another validation of his local standing in his world. In the Adirondacks, Thomas, along with several of his black neighbors in Bloomingdale, Franklin, and North Elba, exercised the franchise. In North Elba, rather famously, the black farmer Lyman Epps, the settler John Brown so hoped would join him on his raiding odyssey, decline and Epps declined. He never missed an election in his life, something that made it into his obituary. I don't mean to suggest this was some kind of post-racial utopia. What nourished the sense of common cause and solidarity among these farmers wasn't any abstract integrationist agenda, it was need. The black land agent Charles Bennett Ray, an enduring friend of the giveaway long after Smith had given up on it, had it right all along. The settlers would make out on the frontier, he predicted, because, quote, mutual assistance, mutual and equal dependence, mutual sympathy and labor, the common destiny of the American people yields equally to all and makes all equal. On the undersettled Adirondacks, the black pioneers um, shared the destiny of their neighbors. They were needed. And when the white farmer and community builder Iddo Osgood urged 2 black land agents visiting his North Elba settlement to swap their gift deeds for better land near him and stay It was because North Elba lacked a doctor and a minister, and they could meet the need. Plain and pressing need made an overseer of roads out of Lyman Epps, an inspector of elections out of James Henderson in North Elba, and a tax collector out of Willis Hodges in Loon Lake. Black settlers were tapped to sign a petition for a new road because the more names on the list, the more effective the appeal. Volunteerism and collaboration steadied everybody's boat. Would Deacon Osgood have extended this invitation quite so readily if other options were on the scene and the need could be met by white people? A default racism was a reality of Adirondack life. It was a long time before Adirondack elections and appointments honored candidates who weren't Protestant and white. Grantees in Franklin, St. Armand, and North Elba, who, with white neighbors, gamely took on town appointments, this year to do road work, that year to serve as constable, tax collector, fire watcher, could not look forward to raises and promotions. No Black pioneering family ever got a ball field named for it, or a hospital or school. On the board of county supervisors, the sheriff's office, at the bank, the coded mores of Northern-style Jim Crow still prevailed. Race columns and ads for blackface shows with all their famously derogatory tropes still crowded the local papers. At the country store, the supplies of rum, cotton overalls and work shirts, tobacco, Carolina rice, molasses, sugar, coffee from the South, all bore witness to the tenacity and the reach of a system that exploited impoverished Black labor while it shortened Black lives. Yet the hopeful and progressive influence of the Black presence in these small rural communities cannot be denied. John Thomas's good name in Bloomingdale effectively abolitionized it, even to the point of inspiring his neighbors to defy a powerful new law. Just south of Thomas and St. Armand, the Hazard brothers, sons of a grantee, joined ranks with their white neighbors to found a new town cemetery. In North Elba, Lyman and Anna Epps, such good friends of John Brown, co-founded with white neighbors a first library, a singing school, and 2 churches. I'm not suggesting civic work like this would bring their children generational wealth or position them for economic advancement. Lyman Epps Jr. died in the county poorhouse. But I consider what this family, or the Morehouses, Hazards, and Thompsons, and so many more, accomplished in their Adirondack homes, and compare this chapter of their lives with what they'd put behind them. When I see these migratory lives in context, that is, I see how this move helped. Lyman Epps brought his family out of New London County, Connecticut, the greatest slaveholding county in New England. No slave owners ever lived or defended slavery in North Elba. The slave-owning culture in the part of the Hudson River Valley towns the Hasbrook family put behind them when they moved to North Elba was centuries deep. No chance of a Black man voting in those towns, not until 1870, when the 15th Amendment guaranteed full voting rights for one and all. These local gains of Black Adirondackers never were acknowledged by Gerrit Smith. John Thomas's fine thank you letter got no response, or by his land agents, or another 150 years of historical accounts. But we are catching up. School children are discovering the story of the Black settlers at the John Brown Farm exhibit and the North Star Underground Railroad Museum near Ausable Chasm. A new exhibit on Black Adirondack lives is in the hopper at the Adirondack Experience in Blue Mountain Lake. Historic markers have been erected to honor Timbuktu, Blacksville, and John Thomas Brooke, now named for the Maryland-born Adirondack farmer who sent the slave catchers packing. A new slave-funded initiative, the Timbuktu Project, is bringing students of color from Brooklyn high schools to the Adirondack Park to learn about this history and its ties to New York City. An archaeologist is searching for the remains of Lyman Epps's farm, and the New York filmmaker Paul Miller has called this history to life in a moving documentary. Choreographers and novelists, playwrights and scholars, family historians have all worked to animate this story in this century. And for many of us, revelations from the archives have charted our next moves. So thanks to all of you for your support for archival work and to the State Archives in particular, to whom I think we all owe so much, and now more than ever. Thank you very much.
Amy, and thank you very, very much. I think one of the great benefits of this conversation today and of your book, for me as an archivist, shows the power, and we really appreciate your comments at the end of your presentation, the importance of looking at history through the lens, or not even through the lens, but through the words of the people who are actually there. Rather than reinterpretation, as you pointed out, the stories of the later historians who put their own spin on the story of the Black experience in the Adirondacks. Your work shows that archival records, primary source materials, enable us to learn the truth of what really happened and the truth of what the story was. And we are so grateful for that. And so thank you.
Thank you back.
One of the things, and you mentioned this at the very beginning, there are no photographs of the settlers. There are photographs of some of the settlers and the grantees, but not of them on their farms or on their land.
Yeah, it's a pity.
Is there much physical evidence left of some of these settlements? You mentioned the archaeologists looking for Lyman's, the Lyman's house.
Good question. Well, her progress is a case in point. Most of like so many Adirondack settlers who bought land they'd never seen from speculators like Garrett Smith, they got to their land, and if it didn't look good, they squatted nearby. They went for the better land that had water, that had access to a road, that had some hope of cultivation, that wasn't on top of a mountain. And the same was true for the Garrett Smith grantees. Most of them did not settle on their allotted land. Those who settled went for better land. So Hadley Kruzik Aaron, the wonderful archaeologist who's pursuing this and has been for some time, started dutifully on on Lyman Epps's given land, but didn't turn up enough to suggest he actually had farmed it or lived there. So she had to move her dig elsewhere, and she's proceeding with that. And even there, if it's the right land, it's still 40 acres. That's a lot of land to cover, even if you have whatever that device is that can look underground, LiDAR or radar, whatever.
LiDAR, the ground penetrating radar. Yes.
So
yes.
this is for her. It's a long project, as it was for me, and I'm confident she's going to come up with something splendid. But it's tough. There are no ways to know if you find an old cabin in the woods that it absolutely belongs to a certain settler. It might have been built by a previous settler and they squatted in it, or it might have been taken over by another family and remade entirely. It's really tough when you're dealing with property that's made of poor material that doesn't last, that isn't stone, that falls apart in the winter. The roof caves in, and then the walls fade in, and everybody's picked off the windows when you leave, if you're lucky enough to have glass. And if you have a hearthstone, that goes too. And if you have a doorstone for your entry, that's gone. And shingles go really fast because they're expensive and take time to make. So everybody's looking out for everyone, but when people leave, they don't waste any time. Those cabins get repurposed and recycled. So it's a bear finding stuff. And I don't know how to solve that problem. I leave it to the scavengers who are smarter about parsing the woods for clues.
And that really, that's what you have to do, because the Adirondacks, the mountains, reclaim the land very quickly.
Yeah. And there's another problem. It is the Adirondacks. It's a park. So you can't dive a shovel into the ground anywhere you have a hunch there might be something under there. You need your permissions. You need to go through the proper routes. And so that's not an automatic either. It's tricky. Archaeology is challenging in the Adirondack Park.
A lot of things are challenging in the Adirondacks, like farming, which I thought that was another really important dimension of the story that you told. The Adirondacks are a very difficult, extreme environment. for anyone. The winters are long. I grew up in Gloversville, which is just at the foothills of the Adirondacks.
Uh-huh.
And we used to say, well, there are two seasons, well, three seasons. There's winter, there's July 4th, and there's Black Fly season.
Right.
And that's, but it's a very challenging environment. And I think your point about the land grants and the grantees being given land that really it winds up being useful, especially for timbering. And the cost of just doing anything with that land was prohibitive.
Mm-hmm.
And the wisdom of some of those grantees realizing this calculation doesn't work out well for me.
But farming continued to work out for many of them, which is something local historians don't realize. They and others assumed that when the grantees left, they necessarily went back to the cities where they presumably came from because city life was comfortable for them. In fact, many came from small towns who actually settled there and continued to farm elsewhere in the region or moved to Iowa in one case and then on to the Dakota Territory, or in my favorite instance, moved to a mountain town in Vermont and stay there for a generation and farm reasonably well and join their local, in fact, become the head of the local GAR, Great Army of the Republic chapter, and have a warm enough name in their new community there that when they throw huge anniversary parties, it gets covered by the state paper in a long column. That story just blew my mind. It showed how the farming, the agrarian dream continues and continues to animate the movements of several of the grantees when their Adirondack farms don't deliver. They still chase the farm.
One of the stories or throughout the book, you talk about cemeteries and as wonderful evidence of the continuity and the people that stuck to it.
Yeah.
And how the cemeteries are, everyone is buried in these cemeteries.
Mm-hmm.
All of the settlers, not just the grantees, but everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And can you talk a little bit about the cemetery as a piece of evidence of the
cemetery is it. I mean, when I've led tours of the Black Woods, I'm really at a loss for where to go. There's a lot of gazing out at vistas and saying, we think this happened here. But the cemeteries you can walk up to and see Lyman Epps's family's grave, see the grave of the this is a great story of the son of a fellow traveler, not a grantee. He was too wealthy and he was from Pennsylvania, but he builds a cabin and a home in the Adirondacks because he so supports Gerrit Smith's idea. And his son is the first of the Black Adirondackers to volunteer for the Civil War. And like several of them, he's admitted to a white regiment. And this happens, I think, not because this part of the Adirondacks is so progressive in its thinking, but because he's pale complected and he passes for white. And he fights with valor at many battles, but at the second battle of Bull Run, he dies and is buried in a mass grave. No one knows where his remains are because so many people fell that day and weren't recovered. There is a dispute over what to do with the marker that honored his name. A friend of this story put a GAR star there to acknowledge his participation in the war, and a town historian objected to it fiercely, saying he's not buried here. Only people who are buried here are admitted to have that star. And only in the last few years was this reversed, and did people get a proper plaque up and a proper headstone that acknowledged his Civil War service and named him as a casualty of the war and one of the youngest to fall. And I'm so happy for that. It's so long overdue. It should have happened generations ago. That's one story that goes with the name. Yeah.
And the shameless plug for the New York State Archives again. He was in a New York State regiment, so his service record is preserved and available online.
Oh yes, that was very helpful to me when I did the Civil War chapter, and along with that, the National Archives records of pension justice appeals from the grantees and their widows and their children revealed a world of information about the integrated nature of social life on the frontier that I would never have found without that resource. In particular, those pension appeals they're amazing reading, really gritty and granular and full of detail. Yeah. Thank you, Archives, again.
So I'm going to do a little bit of a little plug for the archives because we talked about the grantees and who were the grantees and what are they all about. Here's a little PowerPoint that I put together. This is the receipt book of Garrett Smith that's preserved and available in the state archives. You can download this off of our digital collections. So for those who are interested in the names, this is a typescript version of the handwritten version of the grantees. This is a 1936 copy of the transcript. But again, it's available online at the state archives website.
Oh, Tom, I can say something about that. If this
I would love to.
Yeah, if this is the inventory that the city land agent Charles Ray compiled, he offers, as Garrett Smith's own inventory doesn't, the addresses of the grantees who signed up. So you can see the actual neighborhoods, you can map where they lived and how many families were living in a single structure or apartment. You can see where he got the most people excited about this prospect and signed them on. You can see, most interestingly, who could sign their signature and who was illiterate. And it's striking how many people signed with an X. This is another problem. This illustrates another problem the grantees encountered when they got north. If they ran into an unscrupulous guide or surveyor, they were defenseless against the kind of corruption and deception that could take their land away from them and misrepresent their land. So these books are a revelation. I'm glad you have them. Yeah.
Yes, and again, they're online.
Yeah, so, great.
Your book, The Black Woods, is phenomenal. It's published by an imprint of Cornell University Press, and we are so lucky to have it. And like I say, it should be required reading for any local historian or any historian in the Adirondacks.
Say it again. No, I guess twice is enough.
And you can order it right from Cornell University. Here's the web page, Cornell Press, cornell.edu. It's very, very easy to acquire, and it's a beautiful book. And you talk within your book. There's a number of maps which help us understand and put into context what some of those addresses were and where people were settled. One of the things that I say, and I don't know that it's completely accurate, but Route 73 is the road to get into so many of these settlements, and is sort of one of the few sort of vestiges of the effort to bring people into the Adirondacks and to help the grantees get to their properties. They built the road. But in any event, let me stop this because we've got a number of questions that have piled up, and I'd like to go through a few of them. A lot of them are very complimentary, and everyone is really excited about this program. One of the questions that's come up is, what were some of the main crops that the farmers that were had some success, what were they able to produce in the Adirondacks?
Some people actually tried to grow corn. That didn't go over so well. Wheat, root vegetables, maple syrup, interestingly, some farmers did very well with and took it to market. Rutabagas, a grantee was bringing those to John Brown's wife as a homecoming gift. I read of that from one of the letters from the kids. Several of them had livestock and were keeping pigs, not many ever, but enough to get you through the winter. Sheep and poultry. Apples were everywhere. I don't know if people must have brought their own seed when they came with them. That's what I'm guessing. I'm falling apart on the grains. I don't want to misstep. It seems to me that hops were cultivated, but it's puzzling to me since they swore to abide by temperance. So I'm wondering how that panned out. So I might have that one wrong. I think barley was raised, and I'm not going to go any further on that. I think that Hadley would be a wizard on that, my archaeologist friend. She probably
Okay.
has nailed that down. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, excellent question.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that we've got relates to the logging industry. Were any of the grantees who did stay and built homes there, were any of them involved in the logging industry, even as loggers or laborers?
I only read of one instance where Grantee's son was described as a logger, but not on a crew, just with another friend to help him. I think everybody who built their home was cutting their own wood and crafting their own wood and bringing it to the local sawmill when they could afford to for help with that. But I don't see loggers on logging crews, certainly not the French Canadian ones or any of the Catholic ones. I don't think that was a great fit then. I do see concern among the leading grantee in North Elba that the deed holders who owned good forest land were letting it go and missing a chance to hold on to it for taxes and realize its value in timber sales down the road, lumber sales. And he is angry with the land agents for not promoting the retention of deeds and urging the deed holders to pay their back taxes so they can hold on to them for profit, which is something Garrett Smith had urged originally too. He said, even if you don't farm it, keep it for its farming value. It will accrue that over time.
Mhm.
The fact is, hundreds of grantees did, in fact, hold on to their land. We know, at the very least, for the value of their deeds at the voting booth on election day. And we know this because uh, New York City black speculator bought up a slew of Garrett Smith deeds at auction in 1870 when finally Black New Yorkers, Black Americans are granted the right to vote by the federal government, and they don't have to hold on to them anymore and pay taxes on them year after year so they can cast a ballot. They're free and clear to vote without that. So they finally sell their land in that year, and the New York Times reporter speculates this was because they had voting rights finally and they didn't need it anymore. But that doesn't answer the question about logging. I really haven't seen any evidence of that, of Black men on logging crews beyond their own household needs.
And we've got quite a few images of logging in the Adirondacks because it's
Yeah,
big business, and you do not see anything other than white faces on those
absolutely not.
loggers. And
Yeah,
so, which is
true.
something. Well, Amy, I cannot say thank you enough for your research, for your presentation, and especially for your book. The shared history of the Adirondacks just got shared a little bit more, and the story of the Adirondacks just got a little bit bigger. And one of the greatest things about historians like you is you open our eyes. You open our eyes to see the broader picture. And as archivists, we are grateful to have people like you who use the resources that we have, the stories in the words of the people who were there, to tell those stories and open up what really, really happened.
Oh, thank you. It was fun. And it was
Um,
long. And it's over.
so once again, it's a very easy book to purchase, and it's a very worthwhile investment of not only your treasure, but your time. And if you even think about the Adirondack Mountains, get this book. It's very much worth it. This was an insightful and thought-provoking presentation. And for all of you who attended and joined us today, thank you. If you'd like to learn more about this and other topics, please visit the New York State Archives Partnership Trust website at nysarchivestrust, one word, .org, nysarchivestrust.org. It's our privilege to bring these programs to you and to help keep New York State's history alive and to help broaden an understanding of New York State's history. If you have ideas for future programming, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to contact us on an email, aptrust, APTRUST, at NYS as in Sam, ED.gov, NYSED.gov. We'd love to hear from you, and we would love to have more ideas about great presentations like this. Finally, don't forget to join us for our next online speaker series event on Tuesday, March 25th at 12:30. Again, these are free programs. Our March 25th program will feature state paleontologist Winifred Goldring and Making Fossils Come to Life. You can learn more and register for this free event at nysarchivestrust.org. There'll also be a thank you email that will have the link to next month's registration and a recording of this month's program. So again, thank you to all of you who joined us today for this great and insightful program. And thank you, Amy, for bringing us to a new place.
Thank you. It was a delight.